I do think walking can be a useful activity for writers. There's one study that says that walking and coffee are the two most frequent accompaniments to writing. And some writers might write whilst they walk, either in their heads or with a voice recorder or a notebook. I do that a little bit, but I'm more interested in the ways that my walking shapes who I am and feeds into my work, and also some of the reflective activities I can do whilst I walk. How does stepping away from the desk help me to write better? Dog walking's a funny thing because obviously you choose to have a dog, but once you've got one, you've got to take it for a walk every day. And when we set off, we tend to go on the same few routes. We make almost random choices about which one we'll go on. Shall we turn right or left at the junction? And sometimes the decisions that you make are based on things like time, but also they might be based on things like how the dog's behaving. If the dog looks like it wants to go one way, you might say, yeah, go on then. Or you might say, no, we're going this way. And it means that you end up walking across landscapes without really looking at them a great deal. You spend a lot of time in them. It becomes almost second nature going the same few routes. When we talk about writing, we tend to talk about matters of technique and form and what happens on the page. And that makes sense because we have to be able to do those things and think about them. But when we write on the page, it's still a real page. We're writing with a real pen or on a real screen with a real keyboard, sitting at a desk on a real chair that might be more or less comfortable. And I think in order to understand writing better, we need to understand how writing happens inside our everyday lives, whilst we're walking the dogs, or swimming, or going for a run, or washing up. In order to write better, I need to understand how writing takes place inside other activities. I don't think the stuff that happens outside the page is irrelevant. It shapes who we are and what we write. Are you a good boy? Are you? You a good dog? Hey up, who's this? Hey up, come on idiots. Chill out. People get nervous about poems. I think they can be quite intimidating, as if the poem is a crossword clue and you've got to find out what the answer is. But that's not true at all. If you think about a walk, you might go on a certain route, have certain experiences and hopefully enjoy it. But you don't come back at the end of the walk and say, I enjoyed that, but what does it mean? And the same should be true of poems, that we just enjoy them for what they are, listen and experience them, and don't worry too much about what they might mean. The anthropologist Tim Ingold provides support for the idea that what happens outside the page might influence what happens on it. He criticises the separation of nature and culture, individual and world, and says that the fundamental human way of being might be a dwelling in the world. Tim Ingold says, a human being is a being immersed from the start, like other creatures, in an active, practical and perceptual engagement with constituents of the dwelt-in world. The landscape, in short, is not a totality that you or anyone else can look at. It is rather the world in which we stand, in taking up a point of view on our surroundings, and it is within the context of this attentive involvement in the landscape that the human imagination gets to work in fashioning ideas about it. For Ingold, it wouldn't matter that writing is a mental or cultural activity. In order to understand it, we still have to attend to its physical elements, the way that it happens inside everyday time and space. So who am I when I walk the dogs? It's quite easy to think of the city as being chaotic and modern and radical, and to think of the countryside as being traditional, fixed and conservative. But actually things aren't quite as simple as that. In fact, the countryside is just as complicated as the city, and the way that dog walkers move through it involves them in quite a complex engagement with ideas of citizenship. Do I go on a public footpath? Do I take a shortcut? Do I even trespass? Dogs are a kind of conversation piece. When dog walkers meet, it's the dogs that we talk about, and it's the dogs' names that we get to know.
She had to get one in.
Yeah. And in fact, when you meet a lone walker without a dog, people tend to be suspicious. We tend to think with the right to roam public footpaths that the landscape is open for people to move through as they wish. But socially, there's still mistrust of the stranger. We want to know what people are doing in a place before we'll accept them for who they are. I really like the idea of the vagrant, somebody who doesn't have a fixed place in the landscape and moves through it, causing a kind of wake of disquiet. In the medieval period, vagrancy was illegal, so unless you had a fixed home or a fixed function, you weren't really supposed to be in the landscape at all. And I think this connects with our ideas about suspicion over lone walkers. We want to know what people are doing before we'll accept that they can be there at all. You could split the world into the people who travel and the people who stay in one place. As well as vagrants, there's travelling acrobats, nomads, medieval kings. And dog walking is an activity that takes the person who lives in a fixed place out temporarily into the gap between the two. For thousands of years, walking has been the main mode of transport that people had. And of course, physically, it doesn't really change. We still put one foot in front of the other. So when I walk through a landscape, it brings me close to the experience of those historical people and in a way reanimates their lives by walking on the same paths. Good stuff. Upon that open moorland stood a grove, the wished-for port to which my course was bound. Thither I came, and there, amid the gloom spread by a brotherhood of lofty elms, appeared a roofless hut, 4 naked walls that stared upon each other. I looked round, and to my wish and to my hope espied the friend I sought, a man of reverend age, but stout and hale, for travel unimpaired. There was he seen upon the cottage bench, recumbent in the shade as if asleep. An iron-pointed staff lay at his side. That's from the beginning of Wordsworth's long poem, The Excursion, when he goes out to meet his friend the pedlar. Wordsworth's poems are full of travellers, itinerant salesmen and traders, and he himself is always on the move across the landscape.
Hey, come on, this way. Good boy.
Wordsworth did actually write while he walked, either pacing up and down outside Dove Cottage or further afield in the Lake District. His sister, Dorothy, records in her journal that he generally composes his verses out of doors, and while he is so engaged, he seldom knows how the time slips by, or hardly whether it is rain or fair. It seemed to be something of a compulsion. On the 2nd of February 1802, Dorothy records that William wished to break off composition, but was unable, and so did himself harm. There's a story that the different rhythms of Wordsworth's and Coleridge's verse was traceable to the different ways that they walked. I think that's quite attractive, the idea that walking provides an underlying rhythm to a poem. But actually I don't think that intense way of working, of actually writing whilst walking, is very common. For me, walking provides a kind of reflective space where I'm distanced from the work and I can think it through, rather than a space where writing actually happens. For the Romantics, walking was all about having special experiences. You stepped away from the town and the city, away from culture, into nature, and having that direct experience of nature gave you a special kind of knowledge. The same romantic ideals inform our modern ideas about leisure walking, the way that you plan a route that takes you somewhere you've never been before and gives you new views. You take a packed lunch and you dub in your boots. It's all part of a ritual that takes you outside of your everyday life. Contrast that with the daily dog walk. It's not about a break from routine, it's part of the routine. It's not about finding new routes and having special experiences. It's just something that you do every day, and you might not even notice the landscape that you're walking through. So how does my dog walking help to shape my writing? I'm not like Wordsworth, writing whole poems whilst I walk. I might go into the landscape and take a bit of notice of it, but I'm also thinking through other things that haven't come from the landscape I'm walking in.
Let's just give it a go, and I'll just Okay, again.
Dog walk for me is like an interruption.
Daily, quite nice tone.
The daily dog walk for me is like an interruption.
I think I've been great.
A dog walk for me means an interruption. It's time away from the desk. Every day I have to take the bleeding dogs for a walk. It's like a ritual or a habit. And like lots of habits, it starts to become something that you don't really notice. It forces me to get some distance on the work and to reflect on what's working and what isn't and how to fix it. My attention wanders when I walk. It's not about having a special kind of intense perception of the landscape. Sometimes I'm looking at the landscape, sometimes I'm thinking about my writing, sometimes I'm thinking about my gas bill. There's also something called unconscious creativity. By stopping working and getting away from the desk, I enable better ideas to happen. Ideas that wouldn't have occurred to me if I just stayed at my desk typing on the keyboard. Writing's a specialist skill. It takes a lot of practice, and you never really master it. But it isn't magical. It's built out of familiar, everyday activities like walking the dog, or washing up, or peeling spuds, and staring at a computer screen. If you want to write, there's no secret handshake or code to master. It's practice. You just have to do it inside the spaces of your daily life. But tell me, who are they, these travellers? Who drop a trail of litter so that landowners will see and know that misfits, spectres, trouble, coughs have moved through what is cordoned off like footprints on the virgin shore, who are not here anymore, who hang the moles on barbs as proof of vagrant, muddy-trousered truth, whose names are thus unknown. Unknown! Whose flesh outlasts the store of bone in certain lights and certain songs, who leave their condoms blossoming among the cowslips all around, who are not lost and can't be found, who gouge the fields like the swine, who broke the branch and drew a line through every page of statute law, who happened to be there and saw a cheap arrest get made and laughed, who burned the harvest of the croft and spilled the pail, like infantry in the ugly rush of victory lit by the glories of the West, and freed the young and shot the rest, who daubed their lords with axle grease, who carry languages and fleas from one shy district to the next, and take the birch and scree as text, to render pallid by their root the parishes of wordless light. The whisper of their feet in grass says, now cartographers will pass and close the landscape of the clouds, to tell where you are not allowed, who carry human skulls inscribed with wonderment, who bribed the watchman with a knife to sleep, and fudged the total of his sheep, who are the servants of their dogs, and daily sacrifice their legs in honour of the makeshift hearth, and narratives that only start, who loiter in the quarry and repeat, less sweetly, their demands. The adolescents they impressed grow colder when they get undressed. Or maybe this is all a lie, dreamed up by bigots on the fly for fear that outlaw movement might unfix the boundaries of right, who sit and menace on the gate, the cross of whose crusade is not to die, but passing through to leave and reappear, some believe, in halo on the hill that marks the far extent of royal parks, and by their leaving show the folk that those who think of coming back are always and already home, and those who carry in the palm no coin stamped with somewhere's king prevent a stillness happening to make a grave of valley towns, who minister beyond the manse, enable locals whom they meet to feel great tides may loosen yet, and by their talk of fen and ditch help those villagers to reach the ceaseless tram-infested streets of cities, new and obsolete.